Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to dig into this today.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating deep dive. So imagine for a moment voluntarily installing, highly invasive spyware on your computer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. You knowingly download this program that gives a hacker total unmitigated control of your hard drive, your camera, passwords, everything.
Just handing over the keys.
Exactly. And you do all of this just to get rid of a single, mildly annoying pop-up ad.
That sounds completely unhinged.
It does. But the crazy thing is, ancient humans observed us doing this exact same thing thousands of years ago.
Right.
Our tendency to, burn down our own lives just to win a petty argument, it's not some glitch of the digital age.
No, not at all. It's an ancient flaw.
Yeah, and today we're opening up a specific collection of texts, Fables 251 through 286 from the Aesopic tradition.
A really dense, incredible section.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to tear these down to the studs, figure out the mechanisms of our own self-destruction, and more importantly, figure out how to stop it.
I think it's so crucial that we reframe what we're actually looking at today, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Set the stage for us.
Well, when the modern ear hears Aesop's Fables, your mind probably immediately conjures up, a brightly colored nursery book.
Right, like bedtime stories.
Exactly. Morality plays for toddlers. But the historical context, the actual world that produced these stories, was incredibly ruthless.
Yeah, ancient Greece was not a playground.
It was a landscape of fragmented city-states, constant warfare, precarious agriculture, and just brutal power dynamics.
So these definitely weren't for kids.
No, these were survival manuals for adults.
Because if you lived under a tyrant in one of those city-states, you couldn't just stand up in the public square and complain about the government.
Right, you'd be killed.
Yeah, your reward was execution or exile. So these talking animals, these mythological cameos, they were a covert language.
A highly sophisticated form of encrypted political and social commentary.
Right, a way to critique power without losing your head.
Exactly. A philosopher could tell a story about a greedy eagle or a foolish horse, and the tyrant might just chuckle at the animals.
While the citizens in the crowd knew exactly what was going on.
Right, they understood perfectly that the tyrant was the eagle and they were the prey. We're looking at a corpus of work designed to expose vulnerability.
And lay human flaws completely bare. And what fascinates me is that when you read this specific block of fables, a very clear psychological map starts to emerge.
It really does. It moves from the outside in.
Yeah, you start to see how we interact with our environment. We lash out, we misjudge our abilities, hoard resources, fall for scams, and finally collide with our own grief.
It covers the entire human experience.
It does. So I want to start at the outer edge of that map, how we handle conflict, because honestly, we are spectacularly bad at it.
We really, really are.
Let's look at the psychology of escalation, specifically through three fables: Hercules and Minerva, the horse and the stag, and the hawk, the kite, and the pigeons.
The thread connecting those three is our absolute obsession with immediate reactionary problem solving.
Right. We feel discomfort and just want it gone immediately.
Exactly. Our instinct is to deploy disproportionate force. But what these stories expose is the mechanism of blowback.
Violence just acts as an accelerant.
Yes, and furthermore, when you seek an overwhelming outside force, a savior, or a huge weapon to solve a localized dispute, you almost always subjugate yourself to that weapon.
Okay, let's unpack this with Hercules and Minerva, because this one is so visual. Hercules is walking down a narrow road and sees what looks like an apple.
Just a small obstacle.
Right, it's in his way. So being Hercules, the literal embodiment of brute force, he stomps on it.
Naturally.
But instead of crushing it, the apple doubles in size. Annoyed, he pulls out his famous club and starts beating the absolute daylights out of it.
Which just makes it worse.
Way worse. With every strike, the apple swells until it becomes so massive it entirely blocks the road. He's trapped.
And then Minerva shows up.
Yeah, the goddess of wisdom. And she says, "Leave it alone. That is the apple of discord. If you don't meddle with it, it stays small. If you resort to violence, it swells into a monster."
From a cognitive psychology standpoint, this is a brilliant illustration of the negativity bias and the mechanics of attention.
Oh, break that down. How so?
Well, Hercules believes that applying force to an obstacle will eliminate it. But Minerva is explaining that certain types of conflict are entirely fueled by the attention you give them.
The apple doesn't have its own power.
Exactly. It feeds on the kinetic energy of your reaction. Every time you strike it, you're transferring your own energy into the obstacle, making it larger.
I mean, I see this exact mechanism playing out on the internet every single day.
Oh, absolutely.
You encounter a minor disagreement in a comment section, someone drops a slightly passive-aggressive remark, that's the apple.
And you could just step right over it.
You could, but your ego gets involved, so you stomp on it with a sharp reply. They bring their club, you bring yours, and suddenly a tiny misunderstanding is a multi-platform war.
And it completely drains your emotional reserves. You fed the discord.
Yeah, it ruins your whole day.
And that leads to a deeply uncomfortable question about our own agency. When we feed discord, what are we willing to sacrifice just to ensure we win?
Which brings us to the horse and the stag.
Right. The central premise here is terrifying. The horse is furious because a stag wandered into his meadow and is eating the best grass.
Classic turf war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The horse can't defeat the stag alone, so he asks a man for help. The man agrees, but on one condition. He must put a bit and bridle in the horse's mouth and ride him with weapons.
And the horse is like, sure, let's do it.
Right. He eagerly agrees. They successfully drive the stag out, but when the horse asks the man to dismount, the man refuses. The horse permanently traded his freedom for a moment of petty revenge.
Now, I have to push back on this a little because my modern sensibilities are like screaming at me here.
Go for it.
If someone breaks into my meadow and steals my resources, I have a right to defend it. The stag is a trespasser. Isn't the horse just seeking justice?
Well, the fable isn't punishing the desire for justice. It's critiquing the reckless lack of strategic foresight in how justice is pursued.
So it's about the tunnel vision.
Exactly. The horse is so fixated on the immediate grievance losing some grass that he fails to calculate the cost of the alliance he's forming.
He introduces a drastically more powerful entity into the ecosystem.
Yes. In political science, we call this the problem of asymmetric alliances.
Okay, asymmetric alliances. What does that mean in practice?
It means making a pact with a power much greater than your own. The man doesn't care about the horse's meadow. The man wants a domesticated beast of burden.
Oh, man. So the horse just completely failed to read the room.
Completely. By handing over the reins, literally the horse solved a temporary nuisance but initiated a permanent state of subjugation.
He won the meadow, but he doesn't own himself anymore. Which brings us right back to my spyware analogy from the beginning. You give a malicious program root access to kill a pop-up ad. You won the battle, but your computer is gone. I see this in corporate environments all the time.
Office politics are full of this.
Right. Two middle managers get into a petty turf war over a project. They're the horse and the stag. One of them, desperate to win, escalates it to the VP.
And asks upper management to intervene.
Yes. The VP steps in, sides with the first manager, and kicks the rival out. But now upper management is deeply embedded in the project.
Here comes the bridle.
Exactly. Suffocating protocols, daily status reports, crushing micromanagement. You brought in the big guns to win an argument, and now you have a permanent master.
And this scales up to the macro level, too. Look at the hawk, the kite, and the pigeons.
Oh, right. The bird mafia, basically.
Pretty much. The pigeons are being harassed by a kite, a medium-sized predator. In their panic, they invite a hawk, an apex predator, into their dovecote as a bodyguard.
And the hawk just massacres them.
The hawk slaughters more pigeons in a single afternoon than the kite had taken an entire year.
It's the exact same mechanism as the horse.
It is, and we see this repeated constantly in geopolitics. A nation funds or arms a radical extremist faction or invites in a superpower to help fight a border rival.
They think they're hiring a bodyguard.
But the cure is infinitely more devastating than the disease. The savior you arm today becomes the tyrant you cannot overthrow tomorrow.
So, if the ancient wisdom is telling us that reactionary conflict magnifies the problem, how do we actually handle conflict?
It requires discernment.
Because leaving the apple of discord alone feels like losing, not calling the hawk feels like being a passive victim.
Aesop isn't advocating for total pacifism here. If a pack of wolves is attacking the horse, that's an existential threat. That's a different story.
Right. Context matters.
The fables are warning against disproportionate escalation over localized, manageable disputes. You have to run a cost-benefit analysis on your outrage.
So the practical reflection here is asking yourself, what is the actual cost of this victory? Look at your life right now. Where are you currently stomping on an apple of discord? Where are you about to invite a hawk into your dovecote just to win a petty argument?
You have to calculate whether the bridle is worth the grass.
That is a great way to put it. And, the reason we constantly overreact and escalate is usually rooted in a fundamental internal distortion.
We drastically misjudge our own capabilities.
Which is the perfect bridge to our next group of fables. If conflict is the outward explosion, ego is the internal powder keg.
The illusion of competence.
Yes, hubris and empty boasting. We have 4 distinct psychological profiles here. The gnat and the lion, the dog chasing a wolf, the foxes in the river, and the hunter and the woodman.
The underlying architecture of all 4 stories is our tendency to mistake circumstantial advantage for inherent greatness.
We achieve a minor victory through sheer luck, and our brains immediately construct a narrative that we're invincible.
Right, we completely detach from reality, which blinds us to the mundane dangers that ultimately destroy us.
The gnat and the lion is the ultimate case study in this. It is both hilarious and deeply tragic.
It really is.
So you have this tiny, insignificant gnat who flies right up to the king of beasts and says, "I am not afraid of you, let's fight."
And the lion roars, but the gnat has a highly specialized advantage. Size and agility.
Right. The gnat darts in, bites the lion on the nose, and darts away. The lion tries to crush the gnat, but just violently scratches his own face until he's bleeding. The lion concedes.
A remarkable asymmetrical victory.
So the gnat buzzes off, blowing his own trumpet, singing songs of his triumph, and flies completely blind into a random spider's web and is instantly eaten by a common garden spider.
It's brutal.
As he's dying, he laments that he defeated the greatest beast in the world, only to fall to an insignificant insect.
What we're looking at here is a primal example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, mixed with a catastrophic loss of situational awareness.
Because he extracted the wrong data from the encounter, right?
Yeah, exactly. The gnat navigated a high-profile conflict because his specific traits were perfectly suited to exploit the lion's vulnerabilities.
Being tiny and annoying was a feature, not a bug.
Literally.
Yeah.
But the gnat believes his victory means he's universally powerful. Success breeds a blinding hubris. He stops paying attention to the everyday environment and falls into a mundane trap.
It's like a brilliant rogue day trader who perfectly shorts a volatile stock and makes millions during a crash.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
They think they're a financial god. They defeated the Lion of Wall Street, so they arrogantly invest in a failing local restaurant without doing any due diligence and lose everything to the spiderweb of basic operational costs.
They mistook a specialized momentary advantage for universal genius.
Yeah, and we construct these false identities in other ways, too. Look at the dog chasing a wolf.
This one is so relatable.
A dog is sprinting after a wolf thinking, "I am incredible. I'm so fierce. Look at this wild wolf fleeing in terror for me."
And the wolf turns around and pops his bubble.
Yeah, the wolf says, "I'm not running from you, you idiot. I'm running from your master, who is right behind you with a spear."
The dog is suffering from the halo effect of his environment. He mistakes borrowed power for personal power.
I see this constantly in the corporate world, especially in tech. Someone gets a job at a trillion-dollar company, they send an email, and vendors scramble to reply.
They launch a mediocre product, and millions download it just because it's pre-installed.
Exactly. They start thinking, "I am a visionary genius." But the market isn't intimidated by them. It's intimidated by the trillion-dollar infrastructure behind them.
And when that person leaves to start their own venture, they suddenly realize the wolf isn't running anymore.
That realization of actual competence versus perceived competence is terrifying.
And human beings will go to absurd lengths to avoid admitting they lack the skills they project. This is the mechanism in the foxes in the river.
This guy is the ultimate spin doctor.
Truly. A group of foxes are at the edge of a dangerous river. They know it's too dangerous to cross, so they hesitate.
Smart foxes.
Right. But one fox, driven entirely by ego, steps forward. He mocks their cowardice, boasts about his courage, and jumps in.
And immediately starts drowning.
The current grabs him and drags him toward the ocean. The other foxes run along the bank yelling, "Come back and show us how to cross safely."
And his response is just legendary.
As he's drowning, he yells, "I can't right now. I actually have some business at the seaside. I'll come back and show you later."
Okay, I have to stop here because that is the most 21st century response ever recorded. He's literally drowning, and he rebrands his failure as a strategic pivot.
It's incredible.
But I want to debate this for a second. We live in a culture that fundamentally worships fake it till you make it. We're told to manifest reality, step into the river, and figure it out later.
Right, hustle culture.
Aesop seems to have zero tolerance for this. Why is he so ruthless toward the fox? Isn't some level of projection necessary?
There is a vital distinction between aspirational confidence and delusional hubris. Fake it till you make it assumes you are actively building the skills while projecting confidence.
You're in the shallow end, learning to swim.
Exactly. The fox, however, is projecting a mastery he has made no effort to attain, just to elevate himself above his peers.
He's just showing off.
And false confidence that is completely detached from reality is lethal. The fox isn't just lying to the others, he's lying to himself as water fills his lungs.
We see this with influencers, right? Building elaborate facades of wealth and expertise.
And when the market turns, or actual competence is required, they get swept away. But just like the fox, they'll launch a podcast about their new journey rather than admit they couldn't handle the current.
Which perfectly aligns with the absolute cowardice of the hunter and the woodman.
Ah, yes. The guy who wants the applause without the arena?
Exactly. The hunter is walking through the forest, armed to the teeth, talking a massive game. He asks the woodman, "Have you seen the tracks of a lion around here?"
And the woodman calls his bluff.
The woodman says, "Actually, follow me. I can take you directly to the lion itself." Instantly, the hunter turns pale and stammers, "Oh, no thanks. I was only looking for his tracks, not the actual lion."
It's the stark difference between performing an identity and possessing the substance of that identity.
He wants the social prestige of being a tracker without any of the actual risk.
Precisely.
So the mechanism we need to examine in our own lives is the gap between our projected image and our foundational reality.
You have to question your own hype.
Are you chasing the wolf, or is your master doing the heavy lifting? If you build an identity on tracks, you are going to be terrified when the actual lion shows up.
And that false sense of importance bleeds directly into how we measure our worth. The ego demands validation.
And historically, the primary metric for that validation has been accumulation, which brings us to greed, wealth, and the currency of loyalty.
A very heavy section.
We're looking at the miser, Hercules, and Plutus, the goat herd and the wild goats, the eagle and the fox, and the partridge and the fowler.
And the core truth here is that humans fundamentally misunderstand value.
We think value is about possession, but these fables argue that value is entirely about utility and social cohesion.
Let's start with the cognitive dissonance of the miser. It's a devastating critique of hoarding.
The guy who sells everything for a lump of gold.
Right. He liquidates his estate, buries the gold in a hole, and just goes to look at it every day. He never spends a fraction of it.
Until a thief steals it.
Yes. The miser finds the empty hole and descends into absolute agony. A neighbor comes over, learns what happened, and delivers this brutal logic.
What does the neighbor say?
He says, "Don't take it so hard. Just put a heavy door in the hole and look at it every day. You won't be any worse off, because even when you had the gold, it was of absolutely no earthly use to you."
The logic is flawless. The miser is basically a guy who buys a volatile crypto coin, loses his password, but still logs onto the public ledger every day to watch the line go up.
It's entirely theoretical wealth.
He gets a dopamine hit from the idea of possession, but he refuses to realize any actual kinetic value from it.
What we're discussing here are cognitive biases, specifically the endowment effect and loss aversion.
Our brains are wired to overvalue things just because we own them.
Exactly. And the fear of losing an asset overrides the logical desire to utilize it. The gold owned the miser. It controlled his emotional state.
If a resource is never exchanged for security, experiences, or charity, it's indistinguishable from a rock.
That's the hard truth.
But I'm going to play devil's advocate again. Isn't the neighbor being a bit callous? The miser might argue he was building a safety net.
Sure, he could argue that.
We live in a society that reveres accumulation. Billionaires who hoard wealth are on magazine covers. Aesop seems to suggest wealth is morally neutral at best and potentially corrupting.
And that is exactly what is explored in Hercules and Plutus.
Plutus being the god of wealth.
Yes. When Hercules ascends to heaven, he greets all the gods. But when Plutus approaches, Hercules turns his back and refuses to look at him.
And Jupiter's shocked, right?
Jupiter asks why he's disrespecting a fellow god. Hercules replies, "When I was down on Earth, I noticed that Plutus was almost exclusively in the company of scoundrels."
That is a massive indictment. Is the fable saying wealth is evil?
No, it's making a nuanced point about human behavior. It isn't that gold is inherently evil, it's that the ruthless pursuit of gold often requires the abandonment of virtue.
Scoundrels are the ones willing to lie and cheat to get it.
Exactly. The mere presence of wealth does not indicate the presence of character.
And that brings us to the breakdown of the social contract. When greed becomes our primary operating system, it destroys our relationships.
The goat herd and the wild goats is a perfect example of this.
A goat herd drives his flock into a cave during a storm, and he finds wild goats in there too.
He immediately sees dollar signs. He wants to assimilate the wild goats to double his wealth.
So he starts distributing the feed, but he starves his own loyal goats just to heap premium feed onto the wild ones.
A classic strategy of aggressive acquisition.
But the moment the storm passes, the wild goats sprint for the mountains. The goat herd screams, "You ungrateful rascals, after I treated you so well."
And one of the wild goats delivers the killing blow.
The goat says, "We aren't ungrateful, we're observant. We saw how you treated your loyal flock just to favor us. We know if a bigger flock comes along, you'll starve us for them."
The psychological insight here is staggering. It's a timeless lesson in trust mechanics.
Customer acquisition versus retention, right?
Exactly. A telecom company will offer a massive discount and a free phone to a brand new customer while raising rates on someone who's been loyal for a decade.
And then they wonder why they have high churn rates.
Because a culture that punishes loyalty for novelty is structurally untrustworthy. The wild goats recognize the goat herd lacks core integrity.
We see this in romantic relationships, too. If someone ruthlessly abandons their partner the moment you show up, why wouldn't they do it to you?
Treating the new better than the old is a massive red flag.
But Aesop takes this concept of betrayal to a much darker level with the eagle and the fox.
One of the most brutal stories in the collection.
The eagle and the fox swear a pact of friendship. The fox has cubs at the base of a tree, and the eagle builds her nest high up in the branches.
But the eagle betrays the pact.
Yeah, the fox goes hunting, and the eagle swoops down, steals the fox's cubs, and feeds them to her own eaglets.
And the fox is physically powerless to climb the tree. All she can do is curse the eagle and pray for justice.
The eagle thinks she's untouchable up there.
She operates under the illusion of physical supremacy, thinking she's exempt from the consequences of violating a sacred oath.
But the universe has a sense of irony. The eagle steals sacrificial meat from a village altar, not realizing a burning coal is stuck to the fat.
She drops the meat into her nest.
The dry twigs catch fire, the baby eagles fall out of the tree, and the fox eats them.
The ancient text explicitly says, false faith may escape human punishment, but cannot escape the divine.
When you betray your own kind for temporary gain, you introduce chaos into your own life. You invite fire into your home.
And we see that same revulsion toward betrayal in the partridge and the fowler.
The fowler catches a partridge in a net, and the bird begs for its life.
It offers a deal. Spare me, and I will act as a decoy to lure all my friends and family into your nets.
And the fowler is disgusted. He says, "I was going to kill you for food, but after that treacherous speech, I'm going to kill you with absolute pleasure."
Even the predator is disgusted by a traitor. In game theory, if a species starts cannibalizing its own social trust, it goes extinct.
So the practical reflection here is an audit of your own loyalties. Look at your flock, the people who supported you before you learned how to fly.
Are you starving them of resources because you're busy courting wild goats?
An empire built on opportunistic greed is structurally unsound. It will collapse the moment a burning coal drops into the nest.
It's a brutal reality check.
It really is, and it sets up the next phase perfectly. Because we are so driven by ego and quick fixes, we create an enormous market for exploiters.
The grifters and charlatans.
Right. Section 4, hypocrisy, superstition, and cheating the system. We're looking at the quack doctor, the witch, the man who lost his spade, and the rogue and the oracle.
The philosophical heart of this section is a vigorous defense of critical thinking and rational observation. Early empiricism.
Basing knowledge on evidence rather than superstition.
Exactly. Fake gurus rely entirely on human fear. They make unfalsifiable claims and dodge accountability when exposed.
Let's start with the quack doctor. A man falls ill, real doctors give a realistic prognosis, he'll be sick, but he'll live.
But the patient wants certainty, so he brings in the quack.
The quack acts incredibly dramatic and declares, "You do not have 24 hours to live."
He creates artificial panic to elevate his own importance.
The patient survives, obviously. But later, he bumps into the quack in town. A normal person would be embarrassed, but the quack says, "Wow, you must be a ghost. How is everyone in the underworld?"
It's hilarious, but the psychology is deeply serious. The quack is employing the Texas sharpshooter fallacy mixed with confirmation bias.
Oh, break down the Texas sharpshooter fallacy for the listener because it's so prevalent.
Imagine a man standing in front of a barn. He closes his eyes and fires 100 random shots. Then he finds a cluster of 3 bullet holes, paints a bullseye around them, and calls himself a master sniper.
Ignoring the 97 misses.
Exactly. The quack relies on extreme predictions. If the patient dies, he looks like a genius. If the patient lives, he just manipulates reality, literally calling him a ghost to avoid admitting he missed.
We see this with doomsday financial predictors. A guy predicts a market crash every month for 10 years. When it finally corrects, he points to his latest prediction and says, "See, I'm a genius."
While ignoring the 119 times he was wrong.
And humans fall for it, because when we're scared, we want a wizard with secret knowledge. That's the dynamic in The Witch.
She claims exclusive power to avert the anger of the gods, selling charms for exorbitant prices.
But eventually, she gets arrested for fraud, tried by a human court, and sentenced to death.
And one of the judges asks the ultimate empirical question.
You claim you have the power to disarm the wrath of the almighty gods. How is it that you cannot even disarm the enmity of a few mortal men?
It is the demand for empirical proof. If you possess this transcendent power, why are you bound by mundane constraints?
It instantly makes me think of wellness grifters, selling a $5,000 masterclass on the secret frequency to manifest infinite wealth.
But they make all their money selling the masterclass.
Exactly. If they had the code to infinite wealth, why do they desperately need your $59 monthly subscription fee?
The illusion breaks the moment you apply basic logic.
And we see that awakening of critical thought in the man who lost his spade. A farmer misplaces his shovel, assumes his farmhands stole it, and marches them to the city to swear an oath at the Grand Temple.
He projects a hierarchy onto the supernatural, assuming city gods are more powerful than country gods.
Right. But at the city gates, a town crier is shouting, "Reward offered for a thief who stole sacred relics from the Grand Temple."
The farmer has a massive epiphany.
He turns around and goes home. If these magnificent city gods can't protect their own temple, they can't help him find a shovel in the dirt.
It's a profound moment of intellectual maturity. He sheds his superstition.
But my absolute favorite fable in this entire collection is The Rogue and the Oracle, because he tries to grift the ultimate authority and she flips the script.
A brilliant story.
A con artist bets he can prove the oracle at Delphi is a fraud. He catches a small bird, hides it under his cloak, and asks her a binary question. Is the thing in my hand alive or dead?
It's a malicious trap designed to force her into an impossible position.
Exactly. If she says dead, he pulls out the live bird. If she says alive, he wrings its neck under his cloak and pulls out a dead bird.
But she doesn't fall for it.
She looks right through him and says, "Whether the thing that you hold in your hand be alive or dead is a matter that depends entirely on your own will."
A philosophical masterpiece. She pierces the deception and places the ultimate responsibility exactly where it belongs, on the moral agency of the individual.
She completely shifts the locus of control.
Yes. In psychology, your locus of control is how you perceive the driving forces of your life.
Meaning internal versus external.
Exactly. An external locus means you believe fate or other people dictate your outcomes. The rogue is trying to force the oracle to act as an external locus so he can rebel against it.
But she enforces an internal locus of control. You hold the power of life and death in your hands.
The outcome is your choice, and the blood will be on your hands, not mine.
That is incredibly empowering. We spend so much time looking for loopholes. We look to gurus and horoscopes, so if things go wrong, we have someone else to blame.
We want to offload the responsibility.
The practical application here is terrifyingly simple. Stop asking the oracle what's going to happen. The bird in your hand depends entirely on your own will.
But taking that responsibility carries a heavy burden. When you strip away the grifters, the ego, the external conflicts, you're left with the raw, unfiltered reality of your own emotions.
Which brings us to the final section of our map. Section 5, grief, trauma, and the reality of human emotion.
A very complex picture.
We're exploring grief and his due, the nightingale and the swallow, the woman and the farmer, and the old man in death.
The central thesis here is that humans are notoriously terrible at predicting how we will actually feel in the face of profound loss.
Let's start with the darkest one, grief and his due. Jupiter gives domains to all the gods, but grief arrives late. Only tears for the dead are left.
So grief's only pleasure is our mourning.
And the fable ends with a chilling warning. The more devoutly men render to him his due, the more lavish he is with his gifts. If you mourn too long, grief will send you fresh causes for tears.
And we need to approach this with immense modern discernment.
Yeah, because this bumps up hard against modern mental health advocacy. Therapy emphasizes feeling your feelings, right?
Right. We're taught that repressing sadness leads to psychological damage. So this fable can sound like toxic positivity.
If someone loses a loved one and I say, stop crying, you're feeding the grief god, I'm being a terrible friend.
Absolutely. But Aesop isn't advocating for the suppression of a healthy grieving process. He's warning against what happens when grief transitions from an emotion you experience into an identity you inhabit. Neurobiology supports this. When we ruminate, when we obsessively replay trauma, we strengthen the neural pathways associated with that pain.
We get trapped in a default mode network of suffering.
Yes. It's the difference between acknowledging a deep wound and actively picking at the scab so it can never heal.
Grief is a parasite, and if you feed him constantly, he moves into your house permanently.
But sometimes, a wound is so deep that it fundamentally changes your architecture forever. And we see that counter-perspective in the nightingale and the swallow.
A swallow flies to the forest and tells the nightingale to come live near human houses where it's warm and safe.
But the nightingale replies, I used to live among men, but the memory of the cruel wrongs I suffered makes them hateful to me.
The moral is that the scene of past sufferings revives painful memories. This is an ancient acknowledgement of somatic memory and post-traumatic stress.
The swallow represents the well-meaning outsider saying, just put yourself back out there. But the nightingale's nervous system has been fundamentally rewired.
But wait, let me push back. Isn't the nightingale doing exactly what grief and his due warned against? Letting trauma control her life?
That is a phenomenal question. The difference lies in agency and boundaries. The nightingale isn't wallowing in misery. She is enforcing a strict geographical boundary for her own self-preservation.
Healing doesn't always mean returning to the place that broke you.
Exactly. Sometimes healing means recognizing that a specific environment is permanently toxic to your nervous system. Aesop respects that boundary.
It's amazing how those two fables hold that paradoxical tension. Don't let grief consume you, but respect permanent boundaries.
And then Aesop hits us with the absolute whiplash absurdity of human fickleness in The Woman and the Farmer.
It's a brilliant tonal shift. A woman's husband dies, and she's at his grave sobbing every day. A farmer sees her and starts crying too because he lost his wife.
And then the farmer proposes a purely logistical merger.
He literally says, since we are both miserable, why don't we just get married? Problem solved.
The absolute lack of romance is staggering.
But the woman instantly dries her tears and says, you know what? Yes, let's do it. They pivot from existential grief to marriage in 30 seconds.
But the punchline is incredible.
While they're talking, a thief steals the farmer's oxen. The farmer drops to his knees, screaming in visceral, uncontrollable agony.
And the woman is confused, like, are you weeping about your dead wife again?
And he screams, no, I mean it this time. My oxen are gone.
It's dark comedy, but it points to a very real human truth about social expectation versus biological survival.
We perform the socially expected grief for a spouse, but experience raw biological devastation over the loss of our livelihood.
We are deeply unpredictable in what actually breaks us.
And we see that gap between theoretical despair and actual survival instinct in the final fable, The Old Man and Death.
A frail old man is carrying a massive load of firewood.
He's exhausted, throws the wood down, and screams, "Death, come and take me!" Instantly, the Grim Reaper materializes.
This is the moment of mortality salience, face to face with the ultimate finality.
And the old man is instantly terrified. All his desire to die vanishes. He stammers, could you just help me lift this wood back onto my shoulders?
We romanticize an end to our suffering, but when faced with the void, our primal drive to survive kicks in with violent force.
We want the pain to stop, but we desperately want to live. So bringing this back to the listener, do a self-audit of your emotional landscape.
Are you feeding grief more than it's due out of habit?
Right. Are you respecting the nightingales in your life, honoring the boundaries you need to stay safe? And finally, be honest about your burdens. Don't call for death when what you really need is a friend to help you lift the wood.
A profoundly beautiful synthesis of the emotional journey.
So when we zoom out and look at this entire map, it becomes abundantly clear that Aesop is meticulously detailing the architecture of human folly.
Every single misstep stems from a lack of self-awareness.
From stomping on the apple of discord, to starving our loyal flock for wild goats, to trying to trick the oracle, the ultimate message is profound personal responsibility.
We are the architects of our own suffering, but we can also be the architects of our own peace. I want to leave the listener with one final thread to pull. From Prometheus and the Making of Man.
Oh, this one is haunting.
Jupiter ordered Prometheus to create humans and animals, but Prometheus created too many animals. To balance the numbers, he transformed some irrational beasts into humans.
Meaning some people walk around in human form but have the souls of beasts.
Exactly. So as you navigate your world today, consider yourself. Which beast's soul is driving your decisions?
The boastful fox, the greedy eagle,
Or the hyper-aggressive hawk? The ultimate task of wisdom is to recognize the beast within and actively choose the rationality of the human.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.